So, and there we go. Again, as I said, I'm Chad Moutray. I run the Center for Manufacturing Research at the Manufacturing Institute. I also am the NAM's chief economist, and happy to have you all join me today on this. Hopefully, is a very lively conversation. Many of you hopefully have a lot of Q&A that we're going to address a little bit later on. But this topic, let's talk a little bit about the topic overall and what the impetus for it was. We've been doing a number of papers over the last couple of years. Obviously, it's a very tight labor market. We're going to get new jobs data on Friday again. In July, as you remember, the unemployment rate was 3.5%. So we're essentially still at full employment, even though we've seen some cooling in the labor market. And we've really tried to document some of the things that manufacturers are doing really to find those workers that they need to keep and retain, to attract and retain workers in a really, really tight situation, right? And we know that many of you have had to raise wages pretty significantly over the last couple of years to stay competitive. But as part of those conversations, I think it was in an interview that I was doing last year, I just kept hearing conversations about just how difficult it was, particularly in rural areas. And I really wanted to kind of hone in on that conversation and see what unique was it about rural areas that we could try to kind of glean some insights from. And again, comparing and contrasting that with the urban settings. So Anjana, if you could turn to the next page, I believe, on the slides. I want to thank, obviously, FORVIS for all of the work that they have done to help us on this in funding this study. Obviously, they're a great top 10 professional services firm providing assurance, tax, and advisory services. You're going to hear a little bit more from Matt Wood in a second here, but again, we really could not have done this study without their support. And so I'm going to turn it over to each of my panelists in a second, but just to kind of give you a quick run of show here, we're going to do introductions. I'll walk through just a few key insights from the paper itself. I did put the paper link in the chat, so you can go up and look to see what that paper is. Then we'll have a nice discussion, and as I noted, hopefully many of you have some Q&A that you can ask us a little bit later. You see, I messed up the script there and glossed over the slide about who the Manufacturing Institute is. But nonetheless, you can see here that we are trying to provide solutions as much as we can, and hopefully you can get some insights from today's conversation. So, Matt, I'm going to start with you. Maybe you can do a quick introduction for yourself. I gave a little bit of a slide of who FORVIS is, but maybe you can.
In the world we're in, but I just put the feelers out there.
That if you're not speaking, we need you to be on the mute.
You're basically a recruiter. You're a recruiter.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Matt, floor is yours.
Thank you, Chad, and thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. And like Chad said, I'm Matt Wood. I'm FORVIS's manufacturing national industry partner. And as he said, FORVIS is a top 10 professional services firm providing assurance, tax, and advisory services to companies all over the world. And some of you have probably heard me say this before, but our manufacturing industry is our largest industry focus as a firm in terms of revenue, which has always made sense to me, just knowing how important the manufacturing industry is to our greater global economy. So today, just proud to be able to be with you on this webinar, proud to be a partner and support the Manufacturing Institute and the research and their ultimate publication on the piece on attracting and retaining manufacturing talent in the rural versus urban settings. And so just proud to be here today and look forward to our conversation. Thank you, Chad.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And again, reemphasize there that we could not have done this without FORVIS's support, and you've been a great partner to the NAM and the Manufacturing Institute really over the last few years. So thank you for that. Well, two of the folks that we interviewed are on this call. So we did 9 interviews with the manufacturing leaders, as well as a survey. And one of those was Meg Brown. So Meg, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Meg Brown. First of all, I'm just really glad to be here and discuss this really interesting research and topic with you. So thanks for having me, NAM, and also Forvis for getting this off the ground. I am the Vice President of Human Resources at Cambridge Air Solutions. We help manufacturing and warehouse leaders create comfortable work environments for hardworking people, which means we're a second generation family-owned manufacturer here in the St. Louis area. We have about 240 employees, so that gives you some sense of scale and the perspective I'll be coming from today. And I'm just really glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Meg. And Ryan Clegg from Bradford White was another one we interviewed. So you can introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. And I echo what Meg said. It's a great honor to be a part of this. When it comes to talent attraction and retention over the last 18 to 24 months, it's definitely been a lot of trial and error, probably with a heavy emphasis on error. So it's been great to learn from the different manufacturing companies in regards to what they've done. Bradford White, we're a privately held company, and we manufacture products that heat water in the residential, commercial, and industrial markets. So the brands that we have include Bradford White water heaters, Lars boilers, Nile Steel Tank, Alloy Works, and Keltec. So we have 5 locations in North America. 3 of them are manufacturing locations. Our Lars and Keltec operations is in Rochester, New Hampshire. It's about 185 people. Our Niles Steel Tank and Alloy Works business is in Niles, Michigan. It's about 65 people. And our Bradford White Water business, manufacturing operations in Middleville, Michigan, that's about 1,600. All of those areas I'd categorize as rural. Overall employment for us is a little bit over 2,000.
Okay, great. Well, we obviously interviewed nine people, so you only have 2 of them on the call here today, but I know you're going to learn a lot from this conversation, and hopefully we have a great overall dialogue. So we'll go to the next slide. And there we go. So I said earlier that this is Jobs Week. So I'm an economist, so I get excited about Jobs Week. Probably, yeah. So it's September 1st. Is the first Friday of the month. We're going to get new jobs data, and as you can see, manufacturing employment's been relatively flat so far this year, right? So we've only added 11,000 workers. We'll see what that number is on Friday when we get the August data. But 11,000 is I mean, the good news is the bottom has not fallen out, right? We're not solidly negative, but clearly is a slowdown from where we were the last couple of years, right? We've added a lot of jobs in 2021 and 2022. Actually, more jobs, 2021 and 2022. More jobs than in any other 2-year period since 1983 and 84, right? So a lot of job growth over the last couple of years, and yet it's clearly slowed down, right? The next slide will show you that overall, though, despite the kind of sluggishness we've seen, we still have just shy of 13 million workers in manufacturing, right? So 13 million workers is the most we've had since 2008, right? So again, the bottom has not fallen out. We're still at a pretty elevated levels of overall employment. People aren't seeing a lot of layoffs, right? And that's the good thing. The next slide will show you a number that came out this morning, actually. And so if you follow me on Twitter, you saw I tweeted this out this morning. We have 550,000 job openings right now in manufacturing. So you can see where that number has gone over the last year, right? We had an all-time high in April of 2022, right? A little over 1 million job openings. That number's fallen to 550,000. But that's still well above pre-pandemic levels, right? So we're still seeing quite a bit of job openings, still seeing a lot of activity out there for the manufacturing sector, even as things have cooled off overall. The next chart will show you that you're seeing similar trends for the overall national economy as well, right? We had 8.8 million job openings in the month of July, so 8.8 million job openings, but that's compared to 5.8 million people who are unemployed. And so we still, even with that cooling off in the labor market, we still are seeing more job openings than people who are actively looking for work. And that's really what gives us that tight labor market, and is the reason why everybody is scrambling for workers. Right now, these numbers are going to continue to narrow, I suspect, over the rest of this year and moving into 2024. But in my view, this issue is a structural one, right? It's one we're going to be talking about for the next few years as companies really struggle with where the worker is going to come from. And manufacturers, we have to struggle with how are we differentiating ourselves? And so that really is relevant for everybody, but it's especially true, and I suspect a little bit more acute in rural areas. And so that's something that we really want to hone in today's conversation. So the next slide will kind of start showing you a little bit of what the impact of that has been on wages, right? So the other number we're going to be watching very closely on Friday is in a really tight labor market, wage growth has been pretty intense, right? We know that wage growth in July, again, we'll see what that number is for August, was up 5.3% and on a year-over-year basis. And it's not, it was almost 6 this time last year. So that number's cooled off a little bit, but 5% is still a really strong number. And the average manufacturing employee nationally in production on the production side makes $26.50. So again, there's a lot of variation by region, a lot of variation, even I suspect by urban versus rural, and the like. But that's still a pretty elevated number. Now the next slide. Sorry, I forgot that wage one was in there. Is for the overall study that we released yesterday. We did a survey first, and so you're going to see some of the highlights of the survey. And we also interviewed 9 manufacturing leaders, including a couple of the folks that are on the call today. So the next chart will show you one of the things that kind of came out in that is we kind of compare and contrasted, what are some of the things that are attractive about each, right? And so, I'm actually, I should have admitted this, full disclosure up front. I'm from rural Illinois. I grew up in Illinois, left Illinois when I was, when I was 32, 33. But grew up really in a rural area, right? And so this is a huge passion project for me as well, and that we get to talk about what's attractive about being in a rural community. And you can see one of the top things that our members said was cost of living is less, right? If you're going to be locating in a rural area, the cost of living is a lot different than it is in Washington, D.C., where I live, right? Or any other metro area, right? And that's a large part of why people live there. There's also, the ability to, meet your spacing needs. A lot of land, right? And so and land is cheaper, right? And so this is another attractive element there for being rural, right? Now compare and contrast that with the urban areas. The number one issue is available infrastructure, right? The ability of roads and bridges and broadband, etc. Workforce is certainly something that companies focus on, and we certainly have seen, and you see this written up in the paper, when you look at overall population trends between rural and urban areas, we certainly have seen some flight out of rural areas into urban areas too. So that's certainly something that has, brain drain is something that we've long worried about when it comes to rural areas. So workforce is part of it. Proximity to suppliers or customers, right? Those all are really important issues, I think, when you compare and contrast what's attractive about rural versus urban areas. The next chart will take that a little further and talk about some of the biggest challenges that we hear, right? So this is from the survey. So I'll get Meg and Ryan's take on this in a second, but we'll start off with the rural areas. So difficulty of attracting new employees to the area, right? While the cost of living is less, right? If you're not familiar with, if you've never lived in a rural area, we heard from some of our companies, it's hard to attract people, right, to a rural area if you're used to amenities or things that were in an urban space. If you don't have family there, friends there, again, it's a little harder. I think that's probably true anywhere you go, but that we heard that quite a bit. Childcare and elder care are big challenges. We wrote about that in the paper. I know that one of the companies we spoke to in Nebraska, the child care facility in town closed. And so many of the businesses around them kind of came together and really took over this child care facility so that continued to be an option. But we hear about child care across the board as one of the bigger challenges that's out there. And obviously, transportation is another big challenge. On the urban side, cost of living is a challenge, right? Again, it's very expensive, particularly if you're coming from a rural area to an urban area. It's very, you can have a little sticker shock, right? Cost of living is a lot more in terms of being able to make ends meet. Obviously, real estate is much more expensive, et cetera. And so, you know, that certainly are those kind of affordability issues are paramount. But also you see workforce is an issue in urban areas as well, right? Given those larger trends that we talked about earlier. Next slide is aspects of rural or urban areas that manufacturers highlight. And so, you know, one of the questions that Anjana and I asked everyone in the interviews is how do you sell yourself? How are you differentiating yourself from your competitors? How are you selling that rural area if that's where you're largely trying to sell? Work-life balance is certainly something that's at the top of the list there. Sense of community, right? Small town feel, maybe things are a little bit more laid back, right? That kind of is something that's attractive. Cost of living, career advancement, clean environment, et cetera. All of those things are very important. On the urban side, access to healthcare was the number one issue there, as well as diversity and transportation and work-life balance as well. So those are some of the differences that we saw in the overall survey. Next slide will simply bring us to the conversation. And I'm going to grab a drink because I'm a little thirsty here. But Matt, we're going to go around the horn here, but I'll start with Matt. What are you seeing in the labor market? Are you seeing very similar things as what I've described here? And when you're talking to clients at FORVIS, are you hearing similar kind of comments about the labor market and what's attractive and some of the challenges that are there?
Yes, thank you, Chad. And yeah, I would say we are. I mean, I think there's a lot of similarities to the survey and to what we're seeing. You know, I think a lot of companies are just worried about their ability to have enough talent in their market to be able to sustain the operations that they have, let alone be able to do some of the things that are on the wish list, right? As you're looking to people who want to expand, to make investments, to grow their business, that almost has to get tabled if they cannot find ways to have the talent resources there to do so. So I think some of the constraints and the things that people love about the more rural environment is limiting their ability to be able to thrive in those same practices. So yeah, you know, I wish I could say we're seeing different things in our client base, but unfortunately, I think we're seeing a lot of the same things there.
And Ryan, most of your facilities are in rural areas, right? Are you seeing similar?
That's correct. Yeah, we definitely see a bit of a struggle in regards to talent attraction. And I'm going to use our Middleville, Michigan operation because, again, it's 1,600 in a village of about 6,000. So anytime you're that big part of the community, the way that we have to address your needs is really expand our geographic reach. You know, and obviously we've done that through an array of recruiting activities, billboards, radio ads, gas station toppers. We've done geofencing to try to grab as many people as we can within our area. We've been very active in the local schools, everything from mock interviews to donating to STEM and STEAM programs. A couple examples, Girl Scouts Heart of America is one that we increased. And then we also provided pretty significant funding for a robotics program. We even went as far as creating a 5-minute Mythbuster video to share at the schools in regards to what manufacturing was like, and had some of our earlier in career people talk about really the benefits to manufacturing in rural areas, considering that that's kind of the heartbeat for our workforce.
Great. Meg, what about you? Are you seeing similar things? And I guess, are you seeing cooling in the labor market? Is it easier to hire today than it was 6 months ago, right? Given some of those numbers that I showed earlier.
Yeah, so we're a little unique in that we're in what I would call quite literally a suburban environment, somewhere in between the two. So in some ways I pull from both, from a population perspective, I pull from some of the rural areas around St. Louis and also some of the urban areas in downtown St. Louis. And we are seeing, for me, it feels a little bit better right now than it was 6 months ago. It's definitely better than it was in COVID. It's staffed, so it's easier, but it's still not, my pipelines aren't stacked like they used to be pre-COVID. It's not as easy. The old things we've tried don't work anymore. We have a lot of ghosting. So people,
Yeah.
you know, they say they want to come in and they schedule an interview and then they don't show up. That is stuck around. That was a trend that started during COVID and has not gone, sadly. So those are some of the headwinds we see, but actually compared to 6 months ago, it feels a little bit better. Not
Yeah.
necessarily in the skilled jobs, but in my unskilled labor workforce, it's not so bad right now.
Yeah, we hear about ghosting everywhere, right? Although hopefully that, like you said, that trend is starting to die down a little bit. So since you're on the screen, I'm going to ask you. So what stood out to you about the paper that was written by Anjana Radhakrishnan and myself? What stood out to you? And then I'll ask the same question to Ryan and Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really one of the first things I was kind of surprised by was by the significant level of overlap between the two communities in terms of some of the ways that they are recruiting and the stories they're telling to populations, which is just kind of interesting to me. I find myself more curious about that. But then also you mentioned it, Chad, a minute ago, you may even call it vertical integration, like opening up a daycare for goodness sake in order to deliver, to solve a problem, to step outside, like for the ability of our rural, like kind of rural America to step outside the manufacturing industry to solve a problem for their people is pretty spectacular. It's fascinating, honestly. And that would be so difficult for me to pull off in our environment here in this suburban setting in St. Louis County. But I think it's just so interesting that a rural area would do something like that. And so those were kind of the two things that I thought, wow, that's really fascinating. That, and I think there's going to be a lot of companies doing beers and careers as an idea.
Yes.
So Stellar Industries gave us a little gift. Maybe we might have those all over America after this report. I don't know, but those are some of my
So the
takeaways.
Beers for Careers. So two. I have to back that up now since you brought it up. So, first the childcare for thing. That was not originally one of the companies that we were interviewing, but they tried to get me out as chief economist outside the Beltway every once in a while, and I was in Nebraska and I heard that story. And it was such an intriguing element of a company really having to step in and provide childcare for that town that I really wanted to include it. The Beers for Careers example. So that was a small company in Iowa, and basically they had an open house, right, in a bar, right, with a bar tab, and they had a table, a career fair table, and some of the equipment that they sell out in the parking lot, and a very successful recruiting tool for them, and actually a very inexpensive recruiting tool for them in terms of the overall bar tab. And so that was one of the highlights of the interviews for me as well when I did that one. So Ryan, what stood out to you? And if it was Beers for Careers, I'm sorry, I just took your example.
Well, it wasn't just
blame Meg.
it wasn't just Beers for Careers, albeit I did enjoy that the most. But I'd say what stood out to me is the creativity that manufacturers in the United States have to use in order to attract talent. You know, it used to be, at least when I originally started in human resources well over 20 years ago, it was a newspaper ad and people would flock to you. You know, those days where it's an employer market, I think are long gone. So it was just great to see the creativity in different ways that I think we could utilize in our rural settings to be a little bit more competitive and unfortunately stand out above our competition to attract the right talent, as Matt alluded to, not just for current sustainability, but really future growth.
Yeah. Matt, what stood out to you?
You know, I think I knew this, and I think I've heard people talk about it, but I think when I saw some of the stats around the decline in the workforce age ready people in rural environments going down 5%, but yet in the more urban areas going up 6%. I mean, I think it just highlighted just how much harder you have to work in those rural areas to be able to retain your workforce, to attract them. And I think that just really hit home to me to say, you're already kind of starting in a little bit of a behind the eight ball position. So that, and I think the interconnectedness amongst manufacturers in the rest of their communities and just how important they are for everybody to be able to be successful. I think it just kind of reiterated that through the survey.
Yeah. Yeah, those were interesting tidbits as well for me. So we saw earlier in one of the charts that the two top areas for recruitment challenges in rural areas were, just attracting workers, right? Attracting and retaining workers, but also childcare. We talked a little bit about childcare a second ago, but in general, for both of you, right, both at Cambridge and Bradford White, how have you tried to address either of those issues, but particularly the attracting workers? What are there some interesting ways that you've kind of gone about? And Meg, you talked a little bit about this earlier. I guess Ryan did, you did as well, but maybe hone in a little bit more on some things you've done to really get workers into your facilities.
Yeah, I can go first. The some of the things that we've done at Cambridge started, I would say 5 or 6 years ago. One would be that any of our entry-level positions, we really did lower the barrier to entry. So you just literally, I think it's actually in the report. For us, you just have to be humble, hungry, and people smart. And we would be willing to take an 18 years old. And we would be willing to teach you basically anything. So that's been really a competitive advantage for us, that we don't need you to know how to work here to come in the door. And then we offer career pathing. We post every single job internally. Even if we're outside, we might be internally and externally posted at the same time. But we make a commitment to our people that we're going to post everything. So even if you come in not knowing anything, you have growth opportunities and you could see them all the time. And so we tell those stories to prospective employees. We also just lead with culture first. So all our social media platforms are probably 95% culture and 5% product. Used to be the other way around. So that's something we've learned, and it's making an impact. So when a prospective employee is out there looking, they can learn a lot about us just by looking us up and the real us, like the actually, what does it feel like to work here? We use a lot of video. That's not overproduced. It's just kind of raw by design. It's one of our strengths, is that we have a lot of video use on a daily basis in the plant. And so those are some of the things that we've learned to do. One, just lower that barrier to entry in your entry-level positions in manufacturing. Because once they get in, a lot of people end up falling in love with this industry, right? They realize, oh my gosh, I'm making something that didn't exist before I got into here. And wow, I can actually point to it, and I know it's making an impact in the world, and I'm contributing to our economy in that way. And then also just trying to tell our culture story, because we found it we know it's compelling, but the hard part is figuring out how to tell the story and where to tell it in the right audience that will actually listen and use it to come forward. We also did so many failed experiments during COVID for recruitment efforts. So many times we tried something and nobody came, or I mean, we've done a lot of things with open houses and never the beer one. So I'm definitely filing that away. But we've been also, I think we're also aggressive in our experimentation. So we're willing to try new things. It doesn't scare us, even if nobody comes. Our senior leadership team, we literally were waiting for people to come to an open house. Literally nobody came. And we all were like, it's all right, we tried. We got to make sure we're just continuing to be aggressive and trying new things. So I think that takes courage, because that can be scary. And so we're trying to do that as well. Those are just some of the top things that I think about right now.
We know that culture is important, right? And I've heard that in a lot of our interviews. We have another paper coming out in a month that really deals with employee engagement and culture. And so that is how you sell yourself, right? That's why people stay, right? And how what can bring them in the door. So that differentiator is a really important one. So Ryan, I said this already, you said it as well. You're primarily in a rural area. How do you sell that? How are you selling yourself, right? That's a question I asked, I think, in every interview. Sell me. Why should Chad Moutray work for you, right? So how do you sell your company, Cambridge?
Bradford White specifically, one of the first things that we do leverage is the fact, in our 31-year history as a privately held company, we've never had an indefinite layoff or restructuring in force. So we really back up that you can be an employee for life at Bradford White. Meg talked a little bit about culture. We've worked on better defining our culture and creating specific initiatives to make sure it resonates. Our Middleville, Michigan location has a recognition program where managers can recognize their employees for showing a value, going above and beyond, and they'll get Bradford White apparel, a hockey jersey or a baseball jersey or a mesh trucker's hat. we take these stories, and what we're going to do is actually publish them into a book, so that as candidates come into Bradford White and they want to know who we are, what is our culture, instead of it just being, a pictogram, if you will, it'll actually be stories of what people have done at Middleville, Michigan, that actually shows the culture. We've done a lot in regards to flexible schedules. Our Rochester, New Hampshire manufacturing location runs 4 10-hour days. So Monday through Thursday and a 3-day weekend. Our Middleville, Michigan operation has over 50 different hourly jobs. So Meg already talked about it, but that career opportunity, we tell candidates, if you don't like what you're doing today, wait a week, and there's going to be 7 to 10 more opportunities, and you can just go ahead and try it. And if you don't like it, wait another week. Our health insurance, again, kind of from an employee-centric perspective, one of our unions has a very low deductible and a $0 per paycheck premium for health insurance. So sometimes that's a bit of a carrot to candidates. I think really what we've learned, and I agree with Meg, because our mantra for the last 3 years has been fail fast and learn. You're not going to solve it with one swing. But really what we found is applicants have very specific and different needs, and it's extremely important that our employee value proposition be extremely diverse.
Are you pulling people from, so you're largely rural, are you pulling people from urban areas? Are some of your candidates coming from urban, and what are you doing to make that sell?
We do, again, I'll pick on our largest site because it's probably the best example. Middleville, Michigan, that location is 1,600 employees. The village of Middleville is, 5,000 to 6,000. The largest area is about 20 to 30 miles away, and the major metropolitan area is roughly around 700, 800,000. However, you have to sacrifice drives to do that. So we've had to adjust wages, both base wages as well as one-time incentives, in order to go ahead and attract people, that live in more of that suburban or urban settings, for them to drive 30 to 40 miles to work at the Bradford White Middleville, Michigan operation.
Do you hear about, gas prices are going back up again. Are you hearing about that?
Yep. That will, when gas prices go up, we will see an increase in turnover. It is that, and the fact that they drive by all the other employers with their billboards and help wanted signs. It's almost the goal of employers nowadays of try to have the shortest distance from their house to there, so there's not any type of temptations, regardless of how their day went or is going.
So Meg, what are the challenges you're having? So you're mostly suburban, right? So, but you're pulling from urban, you're pulling from rural. Are you hearing similar challenges in terms of, attracting talent for your company at Cambridge?
Similar a little bit. I think for us, we have a daily habit at Cambridge that is called a morning meeting. That sounds very vanilla, but I assure you it's not. It's a 15-minute all hands meeting, and we use it for recruitment. Meaning if you come in for an interview, you're going to be brought to the morning meeting, and we'll probably give you a shout out and thank you for coming. And it's kind of like the book, Ryan, that you're describing, that you're doing, where you're trying to really give them a taste of what it would really feel like to work here. And in that meeting, they can see that we celebrate a lot. We give grateful appreciation every day. We talk about safety, quality, delivery, and revenue publicly, transparently with every employee. If there was a quality issue yesterday, some leaders getting up and grabbing the mic and explaining what happened. They get a chance. And then we show videos of improvements our employees have made the day before, where they're eliminating waste from their process. They don't have to ask permission to do that. And we watch the videos and we clap every time there's a video. So some of the things, I feel like my challenge is, if I can get you in the door, I know I'm pretty sticky. If you're our kind of person, if we're going to resonate with you, to Ryan's point, it is rather individualized. And that's the tricky part, is you're trying to figure out, like, how do I connect to you as an individual and find folks who are likely to find us attractive, so that when they get here, they can have a great experience at that morning meeting. And then and hopefully interview well, of course, because we get to choose too whether they're a fit.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, sometimes they're walking out with an offer, depending on how things are going, because we also had to remove any bit of friction in our hiring process whatsoever. So for my plant, it is quite possible that you could interview and be offered a job within 24 hours with a contingent on a drug screen. So it's just, that's kind of where we are right now. And so some of those things have been powerful for us. But you're right, getting them in the door is still tricky.
And
So.
speeding up that application to hire process, I think, is something I've heard from a lot of companies that they felt like they've needed to. Again, there's screenings that have to take place there and other things that have to happen, but trying to speed that up as much as you can helps on the competition side. So Matt, FORVIS has locations all around the country, right? So are you hearing similar conversations and challenges as it relates to rural locations for attracting and retaining talent?
Yeah, I think we are. I mean, I think what we're continuing to hear people, I mean, I can echo what Ryan and Meg have said, and I agree with a lot of it. What we're continuing to hear people double down on is their company culture and figuring out how to be around a more, family-like atmosphere. People are at work a lot, right? And so you start thinking, even with what we do at FORVIS, you think about how much time you're spending at work compared to how much time you're spending at home. And we always encourage people to not do that math. But, to make it be an environment where you're able to connect what you do each day to what's important to you, you're adding value, you're making a difference. And I'm doing this from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, and I was able to see the results. We're seeing a big push on that. Also seeing where, the broadening or widening of how we go after what kind of people we're looking for, right? And so, you've heard lots of talk about DEI and trying to be diverse, and it means different things to every company and depending on where you sit in the country, right? But I think we're seeing a more intentional effort to find maybe what we'll call unconventional methods of attracting people through, second chance employees and different things like that. Again, back to kind of what Meg, you said, is giving, trying something different. I've probably seen more of that in the last couple of years than I've ever seen in the last 20, 30 years of people just saying, let's give this a shot. And lo and behold, something seems to work after you try 4 or 5 times. It's kind of like getting an at-bat in baseball, right? If you get enough at-bats, hopefully you'll get enough hits.
Yeah, that's great. So Matt and Megan both spoke about culture. So Ryan, I'm going to turn to you. Culture obviously is pretty important for you as well. What are some of the things that you're really stressing when it comes to culture at Bradford White?
We spent a lot of time defining it. So culture for us is customer, which is both internal and external, collaboration, innovation, which isn't just product, it's also people and processes, and community. And then we've aligned initiatives that support that. So as an example, our Middleville, Michigan location partnered with Berry County United Way with weekly food drive. And the way the process works is it's in the morning and a manager and an employee go and work together. So it kind of lives the two of our values in regards to community and collaboration as it builds. And Meg talked a little bit about it, that increased engagement. So it's that, oftentimes what we're seeing is the connection needs to occur, not just in the workplace, but outside of that workplace, to use Meg's term, to kind of be sticky. Those type of initiatives is what we've done, outside of the recognition program, and again, ultimately kind of creating that book. We're pretty early in our journey, but I would say from our perspective, we think culture is going to be one of the things, and I'm not surprised Matt heard this from his other clients. That's kind of a big differentiator.
Yeah. So Meg, I know you do Manufacturing Day, which is coming up here in October, right? The first Friday in October.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that. And one of the things that I often ask folks, we did a perception study a couple of years ago, and I said, do people know what's happening within your 4 walls? That was always one of my questions. And so I think Manufacturing Day and experiences like that really help kind of hopefully change those minds. So how are you using it?
Yeah, it's we love it as for 2 reasons. We use it as an internal celebration of the industry we're participating in. Like Matt was saying, like the more we can connect our people to the actual purpose they're really serving in the larger sense, the more joyful they feel at work and the more engaged they are, and they go home happier and healthier and all those good things, which helps our larger community. And so we use it internally as almost like a manufacturing spirit week, where we do things every week, every day of the week to celebrate. And we share fun tips about our manufacturing, not tips, facts about manufacturing. And we celebrate what it means to be a manufacturer, to be somebody who makes something, and how that contributes to the United States and in the world. And then externally, we've done some cool things. We partnered with some local community colleges that do events for our middle and high schools in the area, where they do, it's like a two-parter day where the kids go through a career fair at a central location at the community college. And we have a booth there so they can get to see a bunch of manufacturers all at once and just walk around. And, you know, you always got to have something cool at your table, always got to have some candy, those kinds of things. And the kids can come around and talk to you. And then the second half of their day is that they get in school buses and they go and tour manufacturers, many of them throughout St. Louis and St. Charles County, which are basically right next to each other here in our area. And that's been really powerful. So we've participated in both of those. So we've had, I mean, I think the youngest little one we had was maybe like 11 or 12 one year, all the way up to 18-year-olds getting ready to graduate from high school who would be eligible to work at Cambridge shortly thereafter. Yeah. And you just think about, like, we try to target when they're here, sharing what's cool about our industry, sharing that, hey, guess what? It's not what you see in the movies. It's not dark and dingy and scary and dirty and all of those things. I mean, some manufacturers are, but our facility isn't, and we're proud of that. And so we show that to them. And then also just we kind of, sometimes we also anchor into, like, they have parents who might be interested or who may even work in manufacturing already. And so it's not just that student, it's also like wanting to engage their family. So we hope we give them something to go home and talk to their mom or their dad or whoever's caring for them about, like, what they learned. Because this industry is really freaking cool, and it has a bad rap in some ways. It's still fighting some of the battles of this work not being dignified and some of that. And we just, that's not how we see it. And so anytime we can get in front of a group of young people to tell them that we're, or show them, literally show them, that's something we're excited to do. And Manufacturing Day has been a great way for us to do that.
So that should have been the pull quote right there. This industry is pretty freaking cool. So we missed that, Anjana. We missed that quote. So Ryan, I'm sure you're doing something similar, I guess, Manufacturing Day or something along those lines.
Yeah,
but
we do. Very similar to what Meg and the Cambridge team has been doing. We've most recently, worked with one of our suppliers, and I probably should back up a little bit. Our locations are vertically integrated. So in essence, we bring in raw steel, we cut it, we stamp it, we weld it, we coat it, and then we build our product. And I don't think anybody can imagine life without hot water. So, that's kind of one of our taglines, to make sure people understand the connection to it. From a student perspective, the one thing that we do is we bring a VR welder. So students can actually use the virtual reality welder to understand roughly what it would be like to work at Bradford White, as welding is probably the number one, what I would call job that we have. So we've gotten some pretty positive feedback from students, teachers alike, in regards to actually connecting students with the way that they want to learn, and making it cool. We have another demo thing where they get to write a computer program to make the machine do something. So it's that immediate connection. Meg brings up a good point. We never really thought about it from a parent perspective. But that is a good point. The fact that if you have a great experience at Manufacturing Day, or even at one of the high school career days, what that will do when they go home to talk about their day, assuming that they're talking about their day and they're not on their iPhone, Android, what have you. But yeah, that's a good point. We never looked at it from that angle before.
Yeah, great. So I think it's time for Q&A. So my colleague and co-author Anjana Radhakrishnan is going to give us the first question.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so we've got a couple of good questions in the chat here. I think let's start off with this first one from Carl about if there are any examples about how rural areas or even the suburban areas are addressing the lack of public transportation. The assumption is that everyone has a license and a car, but this is not reality. So
That's a great question, Carl. At least one of our locations is so rural that Uber and Lyft don't operate in the county overall, let alone public transportation. We have not solved that problem. I would say the way we tried to tackle it is to be very involved in the local government level. So I sit on a couple economic development boards to see if I can influence it in regards to what local employers need to increase candidate flow.
When the gas prices were at an all-time high last June, did you do any kind of gas card or gas bonus or whatever? And some companies did that.
Yeah.
Not to
Very
put you
good
on the spot, so sorry.
No, you're fine. Very good question. We did not. I probably should at least preface it a little bit with the fact that we have 3 different unions, and our union population is about 66% of our total population. So when you're dealing with unions, we did some other little bit more creative things like one-time incentives. We did increases on shift premiums. Again, for the people that the harder to fill shifts and the ones that we knew we were going to have to expand geographic reach to try to be more competitive within the labor market. The gas cards was discussed many, many times, but it was a route that we chose not to necessarily go down.
Yeah. Now, Meg, you're in a suburban area, so you probably have a little bit better public transportation, I would imagine.
We do, but it's interesting because the problem is still real for me because we operate 410s and our first shift starts before the buses are running and our second shift ends after they've stopped for the day. And so for me, it's actually, we haven't come across it very often in our current population, but where I think I'm missing is candidates who don't even look at us that I don't even know about because I never talk to them because they know that they can't get to us physically. Using public transport. And so as it relates to our diversity inclusion type work and tapping into new populations, we're going to have to solve that problem. I'm like you though, Ryan, we haven't figured out how to solve it. And it's often for me where I see it and feel it the most is urban candidates trying to get out to the county and want to use public transportation because they can access it, but it doesn't run round the clock enough or adapt to our schedule, sadly. So the problem is real and I haven't solved it. We haven't solved it.
So Anjana, you have another question?
Yeah, we've got a couple in the chat here. So I think Meg kind of mentioned removing barriers to hire. So Anne here was wondering, if you could talk a little bit about like what those barriers were that you found kind of success in cutting down on time to hire.
Yeah, sure. So one is we used to use a platform that was a video-based interviewing platform, and it was a huge time savings for us about 5 years ago when we implemented it because it replaced all of our phone screens. So my team would be calling people to do phone screens, and they wouldn't be there. It just was a huge waste of time in many, many ways. Plus, phone screens can take a long time, and then you have to adapt what you've heard to the hiring manager. And so there's just a lot of waste in that process. So one of the improvements that we made was to leverage a platform called SparkHire. And we had some really good success with it where it was an interview-based platform. So the person could take the interview, the phone screen, if you will, but video-based, anytime they wanted. I don't care if it's 2 a.m., doesn't matter to me. You can do it in real time on your own and it sits there and then the hiring manager could watch it and score it and decide if they wanted to meet you. When COVID got really difficult, that step, all of our hiring managers were like, nope, we don't want to do that anymore. Like if they apply and we like the look of their resume, we want to move straight to interview. And so we just tried it for a little while because we were all a little nervous that we were decreasing our efficiency at screening. But it ended up suiting us. And so we actually don't use SparkHire anymore. And we just go straight from resume review to interview. And that interview, it's one and done. So like I said, you come for a morning meeting, you meet the supervisor, they interview you for maybe half hour, 45 minutes, then you go to the morning meeting or vice versa. And that's it. Like we know at that point for the shop, at least, whether we're hiring you or not. And skilled positions might be a little different. We do some weld tests and we do some skill testing. So I'm more talking about the least skilled positions, if you will. But yeah, those are some of the other barriers. So that those like kind of clunky things that slow a process down. You think you're doing it for screening purposes, but in the end, our team was like, that's just too much. So that's some of the stuff that we've done also.
Thanks, Meg. We've got a bunch of good questions in the chat, but we've only got time for one more here. So I think this one's interesting. We didn't delve into this in the study itself, so would be interested to hear Meg and Ryan's take on this. But do either of you know of any policies at either the state or local level that have had a positive impact for rural manufacturers? Haley wants to know in relation to housing, childcare, or transportation, as we just discussed, some of these issues that are harder for employers to address alone.
I can talk a little bit to the state of Michigan. So the state of Michigan, with their COVID money, did put together a program for subsidized childcare. Unfortunately, the county that our Middleville, Michigan location and Niles, Michigan locations are in, they didn't qualify. But in talking with some companies that did help, transportation, and Matt, I think, talked about it earlier, public transportation continues to be a barrier in regards to when it's offered, what time it's offered, where the bus line runs, those type of things. I've not heard of anything that the state of Michigan has done or any of the, local ordinances. Like I said, healthcare was the biggest one that Michigan attacked with some of the COVID money.
I actually don't
Go
have
ahead.
much experience because we're not in the rural environments, and so I don't have much to share, unfortunately.
So it's not this paper, but a forthcoming paper, Anjana, that we did on the marginal dollar. Ohio appears to have a lot of money out there, grant money for training and development. So I thought that was an interesting. They have a lot of opportunities there. And the Biden administration has put out a lot of proposals on childcare, right? So I don't know to what extent any of them will become law, given that we have divided government. But I know that they have their Council of Economic Advisors and folks have really been on top of that issue pretty intently. Maybe Anjana, we have time for one more quick one, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure. Yes. We've got a question about hiring formerly incarcerated individuals. Matt had mentioned second chance, and that was from Ethan. And then Michaela also mentioned here wanting to know about flexibility and work-life balance. Michaela, we've got that flexibility white paper coming out soon that we worked on. We talked to a bunch of manufacturers about that topic. Michaela was one of them. And so that paper will be coming out in a few weeks. So keep an eye out for that. But to Ethan's question about second chance hiring, Meg and Ryan, do either of your companies hire from that population?
Meg, unless you want to go first, I can very briefly answer it because my answer is going to be relatively short. We've started to explore that as an option. What we've found is you just have to be very selective and be very cautious to make sure it aligns with your culture. The encouraging thing is there are a lot of kind of reform work programs that if you can partner with the right correctional facility in regards to who you are, what you do, that those type of relationships, I would say, are a little bit more positive. My experience previous to Bradford White, because I've done it, it's been a lever to pull for at least the last 20 years, is a bit mixed. And the unfortunate thing about those programs, it just takes one bad experience to wreck it for everybody else. So there's a fair amount of change management. People just need to think about, to communicate to their workforce as to why are you doing it and how to properly integrate it into your culture.
I'd say at Cambridge, we don't have formal programs that we're working with, but we do not have background checks as part of our screening. And so I know that I have folks with backgrounds that I'm not even aware of that work here, and we're just not concerned about it. So in some ways, maybe I'm doing it accidentally, in some level. But we different population, but along the lines of what you're saying, Ryan, related to change management, we've had a lot of success working with a company here locally that helps us employ adults with disabilities. And that's an example of, like, we had to do quite a bit of change management to get ready to figure out, first of all, what roles we have that are would be acceptable and would be a good fit for that population. And then also what leaders are ready to do that. How do we get them ready? And we've graduated we're a small company, but we've graduated 3 classes of 2 adults with disabilities each. So I have one on a first shift, one on second shift, and one at my other location, successfully so far with partnering with this company. And so part of me thinks, well, we could probably do it if we wanted to get more structured about it, especially because we've proven to ourselves that we could with neurodiversity. And I'd be open to that. So it's interesting to think about getting a little bit more formal with it.
So I put a link in the chat there for a paper that we did for the National Wood Pallet and Container Association. You can only really see the executive summary because we did it for that association, but we talked quite a bit about, and you see a lot of usage for both neurodiverse as well as second chance hiring in that sector. They've really really embraced that as an attraction tool for getting more workers in the door. So we're going to do some slides here to wrap it out. So first I'm going to say thank you to Matt Wood from FORVIS, to Meg Brown from Cambridge Air Solutions, and Ryan Clegg from Bradford White. I got the names correct, Ryan. Aren't you proud of me there? Anyway, so thank you for your help today. Thank you for, again, I think the paper turned out really, really nicely, and I appreciate all of your help and support there. If you're interested in more research, you can see here, you can scan this page and you can see where all of our research is, but also more importantly, any information about upcoming events, right? And so we have the next paper coming out on, and we already mentioned it earlier, the role of culture and employee engagement. So that's coming out on September the 25th with a webinar the very next day on the 26th. And then the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about workforce in focus. So for many of you who know me, you know that I write the Monday Economic Report in my NAM role. But Anjana and I started writing Workforce in Focus. This will be, I think, the 4th or 5th iteration of it. If you're interested in getting Workforce in Focus, the September edition and everyone that comes after that, you can scan here to sign up. Comes out the second Thursday of every month. And then the last slide is hopefully we can see many of you at the Workforce Summit. We had a really great Workforce Summit last year in Cincinnati, and we're going to be doing a sequel, which is really going to focus more on solutions in Atlanta on October the 16th to the 18th. So if you have not signed up, I would encourage you to do so. And again, you can scan for that as well. So with that, I think our time is up here. And again, I thank all of you for participating. Thank FORVIS for their support in this study. And thank you to Meg and Ryan for your help, not just for the interviews, but also for what could have been an even longer conversation. I think we could have kept going on with more Q&A if we wanted more time. And so if you have more questions, go ahead and send them my way, and we'll try to get answers back to you for those that we did not address. With that, have a great day.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye, thank you.